So we've established that this sleeve matches this armhole. So we now need to get the two talking together. And this is where we were going to need to have the sleeve with the right side of the garment facing us and the armhole with the wrong side. Now, we want to make sure, first and foremost, that you're placing both the sleeve and the main garment pieces right side to right side. So that is the right side of the garment. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pin just at the underarm there. Okie dokie. I'm then going to find the shoulder point and the shoulder notch, and I'm going to pin that together like so. And I'm going to ease all of that in. So the first thing I'm going to do is join all those notches up together, and then I'll teach you how to ease in any bits of fabric that don't want to sit flat. So one of the most important things to do when you're pinning in sleeves is to make sure your pin heads are going to the outside of the garment. And this is to assist the sewing process a little later on, because whilst we are easing in the sleeve head is actually about 2 centimeters bigger than the armhole or the armscye, which is the French word for it. And that's to allow it to sit properly on your body. Because if it didn't have that extra 2 centimeters, you're likely to be walking around with the arms straight outwards. So we need to sew this in, but we have to pin on this side, but we'll be sewing it probably from the other side, depending on your machine. So I'm going to carry on pinning this, and I shall talk you through the next step. Right, okay, so I've now pinned this in at the notches, and you should start to see little bits of wave happening on the sleeve itself, and that's because there is more fabric in the sleeve than there is in the sleeve head. Now, because of that, the nature of that, it means that you can't do a pinning technique where you just pin side by side, laying everything flat, because what will happen is by the time you've got round to the end, there'll be a big bunch of fabric that isn't eased in. So we've got to do a quartering method to assist with this, and this is where essentially you take sections, so normally between the pins, and you divide it by 2. So we go by pin to pin, and we find the halfway point between those pins, and we give it a nice press, leaving a sort of slight mark, and we join that fabric up where it's been pressed, and you can see actually that has made a significant difference to that waviness. So we need to go around and do that between all the different parts, particularly around the bits that are very wavy, and we're going to get that all nice and secure. The only other thing that I would say about this is that it is incredibly important to remember that you are not stitching on the edge of the fabric, you are stitching at the seam allowance. So as long as it's sitting flat at the seam allowance, don't worry too much if you've got waves going on in the seam allowance, because they will sort themselves out. Right, so this has now been eased in, and I'm very happy with this. Now when you get really confident, you can take your garment straight to the sewing machine and stitch it. However, one of the things I always recommend to students who haven't really done many sleeve insertions, and something that I do even now on a regular basis, even though I've done hundreds and hundreds of sleeves, is I tend to hand baste around the sleeve cap using a bit of contrast thread. And it just means that once it's hand basted in, I can take all these pins out and it makes the sewing process a whole lot easier, and you're far less likely to have any tucks or puckers. So let me just replace that. Okay, so you don't need to do a particularly neat stitch. It just needs to be in place. So what I tend to do is take a long thread. This is a single layer of thread, and I'm going to weave it in and out about every 5 to 7 mil. Okay, you can do it quite quickly. You want to leave a nice long tail thread. Be careful not to pull those pins out. And once you've basted it inside the seam allowance, I should add, it's just going to make sewing a whole lot easier, and you can see immediately whether there's going to be any puckers. So I'll baste this and then I'll take it to the sewing machine. Right, so you can see that this has all been hand basted. It didn't take me very long, and it was definitely a step worth taking because I know that this is sitting lovely and flat and is set in perfectly. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to stitch it. Now, because this is a continuous line of stitching, what I've done is I've actually taken off my free arm because I can then get my hand underneath, and this throat piece is actually narrowed so that I can place the sleeve in and sew it into position. However, in the interest of those who might not have a narrow throat or not have capacity to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you an alternative way of stitching in a sleeve or anything that's got a rounded edge or curved continuous edge, using a slightly different method. So this method requires you to come in from the top. Okay, so this is the actual sleeve head, and I'm sewing it with the presser foot on the inside of the garment. What people do want to do sometimes, if they don't have capacity to stitch it around the throat of their sewing machine, is they come in from the underside and they really struggle to get this all the way around. But by coming in from the top, you'll basically maintain that circle and it's nice and easy to sew. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start at the armhole, the bottom of the armhole where the seams meet, and I'm going to stitch at my 1 centimetre seam allowance in this instance. I'm going to place my presser foot down and I'm going to wind my needle in, and I'm going to do a couple of stitches forward and backwards, and then again I'm going to take it nice and slowly and make sure that I'm moving any piece of loose garment away from the sewing line. Now, because you have done all of that basting, you're not going to have to worry a huge amount about your easing because we know it's already done. Okay, so what I'm doing is I'm just periodically stopping, putting my needle down, making sure that none of the garment is trapped underneath and that nothing is puckering. Okay, and that's that done. So that's now been fully stitched. I'm going to go and check the right side of the garment to make sure there's no puckers, and that's sitting beautifully. So I'm going to remove the basting stitches and I'm going to trim these edges off just as I did in the previous video, and then I'm going to zigzag that edge as a nice finish.